The brownstone in Georgetown was immaculate, like a museum where no one actually lived. Catherine Hayes had been cleaning houses in Washington, D.C. for 8 years, and she'd learned to read homes the way some people read books. This house, with its perfectly arranged furniture and spotless surfaces, screamed loneliness louder than any mess ever could. Catherine was 29 years old and had been on her own since she aged out of foster care at 18. 11 years of making her own way, of learning that survival meant staying invisible, keeping your head down, and never getting too attached to anything or anyone. She'd perfected the art of being present, but unseen, of moving through other people's lives like a ghost who left everything cleaner than she found it. The agency had given her the basics. Mr. James Thornton, widower, worked from home, had a 7-year-old son named Lucas. The house needed deep cleaning twice a week. Good pay, but the previous 3 cleaning services had quit within a month. No explanation given. Catherine should have known that meant trouble, but good pay was hard to turn down when you had rent due and a car that needed new brakes. She let herself in with the key code the agency provided, calling out softly, "Hello? Cleaning service." No response. The house felt empty, despite knowing someone was home. Catherine set down her supply caddy and looked around. The living room was pristine. Too pristine. No toys scattered about, no evidence a child lived here. Just expensive furniture arranged with mathematical precision and family photos on the mantel that looked more like a staged display than actual memories. Catherine moved closer to the photos. A beautiful woman with kind eyes and dark hair, laughing in most of the pictures. Mr. Thornton, tall, serious, handsome in that austere way some men wore like armor. And a little boy with his mother's eyes and his father's solemn expression, looking at the camera like he was cataloging details rather than simply being photographed. She died 2 years ago. Catherine spun around. A man stood in the doorway, James Thornton in person, even more imposing than his photo suggested. He was maybe 35, with dark hair showing premature gray at the temples and blue eyes that assessed her with unsettling precision. He wore jeans and a fitted black sweater, casual clothes that somehow looked formal on him. Everything about his posture screamed military or intelligence training. "I'm sorry for your loss," Catherine said automatically. "Everyone is." His voice was flat, emotionless. "The cleaning supplies are under the kitchen sink. My office is off limits. The door will be locked. Lucas's room is upstairs, second on the right. He's in there now. Does he need anything? Should I leave him alone?" James's tone was sharp. "He doesn't like strangers. Just clean around him if you need to access his room. Don't try to talk to him. Don't ask him questions. Don't attempt to engage." Catherine felt her professional smile falter. "Mr. Thornton, I'm just here to clean. I'm not going to bother your son." "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. The other services tried to help. Lucas doesn't need help from strangers. He needs to be left alone. After he disappeared back into his locked office, Catherine stood in the perfect living room trying to process the interaction. There was something deeply wrong in this house, something beyond grief. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. She started with the kitchen, which was immaculate except for a single coffee cup in the sink and a child's plate with untouched sandwich crusts. Catherine washed them, noting the pattern. This was clearly a daily occurrence. The father drinking coffee, the son not eating. The living room took an hour, not because it was dirty, but because Catherine found herself moving slowly, listening. She could hear the faint sound of typing from the locked office, but from upstairs, nothing. No TV sounds, no music. No evidence of a 7-year-old boy. Catherine climbed the stairs, her footsteps soft on the plush carpet. The second door on the right was closed. She knocked gently. "Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm just here to clean. Is it okay if I vacuum?" No response. Catherine opened the door carefully. The room was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. And there, in the corner, sat a small boy with dark hair and enormous blue eyes. He was on the floor, surrounded by books, reading one with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone his age. He didn't look up when Catherine entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. "I'm going to start with the bathroom, okay?" Catherine said softly. "Let you keep reading." The bathroom connected to Lucas's room was spotless, clearly unused. Catherine cleaned it anyway, taking her time, aware of the silent child in the next room. When she returned to the bedroom with her vacuum, Lucas had moved to a different corner, still reading, still completely absorbed. Catherine started vacuuming, working around him. She was near the bookshelf when she noticed something that made her stop. The books weren't children's books. They were technical manuals, science textbooks, books on quantum physics and advanced mathematics, books no 7-year-old should be reading, let alone understanding. She glanced at Lucas. He'd finally looked up from his book, watching her with those unsettling blue eyes. They were old eyes, ancient, like he'd lived entire lifetimes already. Sad eyes that reminded Catherine of her own reflection when she was young, after her mother died and the foster homes began. "You like science?" Catherine asked, forgetting James's warning about not engaging. Lucas stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he held up his book. "Advanced Theoretical Physics." Catherine felt her eyebrows rise. "That's pretty advanced." Lucas set the book down and picked up a notepad. He wrote something and held it up. "I'm 7, but I read at a college level. IQ tested at 167. Gifted, they say. Different, I know." Catherine felt her heart clench. She knelt down, bringing herself to his level. "Different isn't bad." Lucas wrote again. "Everyone says that. No one means it. I mean it." Catherine sat on the floor, cross-legged, her vacuum forgotten. "Different just means you see the world in a way other people don't. That's not wrong. It's just different." Lucas studied her with those ancient eyes. Then he wrote, "Why aren't you afraid of me?" "Afraid? Why would I be afraid of a 7-year-old? Everyone else is. Not afraid exactly. Uncomfortable. They don't know what to do with me. I don't talk like other kids. Don't play like them. Don't think like them." He paused, pen hovering. "I stopped talking 6 months ago. Easier than trying to translate my thoughts into words people want to hear." Catherine felt tears burning behind her eyes. She recognized this child, had been this child in a different way, the one who didn't fit, who made adults uncomfortable, who learned that silence was safer than trying to connect. "Can I tell you something?" Catherine asked softly. Lucas nodded. "When I was 8, I stopped talking too. For a whole year. I was in my 3rd foster home, and I just couldn't anymore. Couldn't keep explaining myself. Couldn't keep trying to be what people wanted. So I stopped." Lucas's eyes widened. He wrote quickly. "What made you start again?" "A teacher. Mrs. Chen. She didn't try to make me talk. Just sat with me every day during lunch. Sometimes she'd read to me. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence. She didn't need me to be anything except whatever I was." Catherine smiled at the memory. "One day, I just started talking again. Because I wanted to. Not because someone needed me to." Lucas was watching her with an intensity that was almost painful. Then he wrote, "My mom understood me. She never made me feel wrong. But she died. And now Dad doesn't know what to do with me. He's scared of me, I think." "He's not scared of you," Catherine said gently. "He's scared he'll fail you. That's different. He already has." The words were stark on the page. Catherine felt anger rising. At James Thornton for being so lost in his own pain that he couldn't see his son drowning. At the universe for taking this boy's mother. At every adult who'd looked at Lucas and seen a problem instead of a child who needed love. "Lucas, can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Do you want to talk? Or is the silence working for you?" Lucas thought for a long moment. Then he wrote, "I want to talk, but only if someone actually listens. Really listens. Not just waits for me to stop so they can talk. I can do that." Catherine held out her hand. "Deal?" Lucas looked at her hand like it was a foreign object. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook it. His hand was small, fragile, but his grip was firm. "Deal," he said out loud. His voice was quiet, slightly hoarse from disuse, but clear. Catherine heard footsteps on the stairs. James appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning," Catherine said calmly, standing, "and having a conversation. I specifically told you not to engage with my son, and I specifically didn't agree to that." Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "Lucas and I were just talking, that's all." "Lucas doesn't talk. He does now." Catherine gestured to the boy, who was watching his father with an unreadable expression. "Don't you, Lucas?" "Yes," Lucas said quietly. "I do." James looked like he'd been struck. He stared at his son, something raw and painful crossing his face. You talked." "She listened," Lucas said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine gathered her vacuum, sensing this was a moment the Thornton men needed without an audience. "I'll finish downstairs." As she left, she heard James's voice, shaky and uncertain. "Lucas, Whatever he said next was lost as Catherine descended the stairs, but she could hear the murmur of voices, hesitant, broken. but real. Father and son, trying to find their way back to each other. Catherine was packing up her supplies when James found her an hour later. He looked exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but also somehow lighter. "He talked to me," James said, his voice raw. "For the first time in 6 months, my son actually talked to me." "That's good. How did you do that?" "The therapists, the specialists, everyone said to give him time, space. No one said sit on the floor and just talk." Catherine shouldered her supply bag. "Sometimes people don't need therapy. They just need someone to see them as human, instead of as a problem to solve." James ran a hand through his hair. "The other cleaning services, they tried to help too. Tried to engage with Lucas, but he never responded." "Why you?" "Maybe because I wasn't trying to fix him." Catherine headed for the door. "I recognized him. The kid who's different, who doesn't fit, who everyone treats like they're made of glass or explosives. I was that kid once. Still am, in some ways." "Wait." James followed her to the door. "Will you come back? Not just to clean, but for Lucas. He needs someone who understands him." "I'm the cleaning lady, Mr. Thornton. Not a therapist or a nanny. I know. But you're also the first person besides his mother who's made him feel safe enough to talk. That's worth more than any credentials." James's voice dropped. "Please. I'm desperate here. I'm watching my son disappear, and I don't know how to reach him. You reached him in an hour. I'm begging you to help." Catherine should have said no. Should have maintained professional boundaries, collected her paycheck, and moved on to the next client. But she thought about Lucas's ancient eyes, about his notepad confession that everyone was uncomfortable around him, about the way he'd said deal, like he was making a pact with someone who actually saw him. "I'll come back," Catherine said, "but I'm not trying to fix Lucas. He's not broken. He's just different, and different is okay." James nodded, something like relief flooding his features. "Thank you." Catherine returned 2 days later, and Lucas was waiting for her in the living room. He wasn't reading this time, just sitting on the couch, hands folded, like a tiny adult waiting for an appointment. "Hi, Lucas," Catherine said, setting down her supplies. "Hi." His voice was still quiet, but stronger than before. "Are you really coming back just to clean?" "I'm really coming back to clean," Catherine smiled. "But I'm also coming back to see you, if that's okay." Lucas nodded solemnly. "It's okay. Can we talk while you work?" "Absolutely." They fell into a routine. Catherine would clean, and Lucas would follow her from room to room, talking. At first it was facts, science, mathematics, things he'd read. Lucas's brain worked like a supercomputer, making connections at lightning speed, seeing patterns others missed. He'd explain quantum entanglement while Catherine dusted, discuss theoretical physics while she vacuumed. But slowly, the facts gave way to feelings. Lucas talked about his mother, about how she used to sit with him for hours while he explained his latest scientific obsession, how she never looked confused or bored, just fascinated, how she made him feel like his different brain was a gift, not a curse. "I miss her," Lucas said one day, his voice cracking. He was sitting on his bedroom floor while Catherine changed his sheets. "I miss her so much it feels like there's a hole in my chest." Catherine sat down beside him, the sheets forgotten. "I know. I miss my mom too. Every single day. Does it get better?" "It gets different. The hole is always there, but you learn to live around it, and eventually, you can remember the good parts without it hurting quite so much." Lucas leaned against her shoulder, and Catherine put her arm around him. They sat like that for a long time, two people who understood loss in a way you can't unless you've lived it. James found them like that. He stood in the doorway, watching his son seek comfort from a stranger because he didn't know how to ask his father for the same thing. Catherine saw the pain on his face, the guilt. "Lucas," James said softly, "it's time for dinner." Lucas pulled away from Catherine reluctantly. "Will you be here Thursday?" "I will." After Lucas left, James lingered in the doorway. He never did that with me. Never just sat close. "Have you tried sitting on the floor with him?" Catherine asked, standing to finish the bed. "What?" "Sitting on the floor. Lucas lives on the floor. His books are there. His thinking space is there. You want to reach him? Get on his level. Literally." James looked at her like she'd suggested something revolutionary. Maybe, Catherine thought. For him it was. Over the next month, Catherine watched the Thornton house transform. Not physically, it stayed immaculate, but emotionally. James started sitting on the floor with Lucas, started asking about the books he was reading, started really listening instead of just nodding along. Lucas began talking to his father. hesitantly at first, then more freely. They'd never have a typical father-son relationship. Lucas's brain didn't work typically, and James's background in intelligence made him naturally guarded. But they were building something real, something that worked for them. Catherine should have been happy, should have felt accomplished. But instead, she felt hollow, because with every week that passed, she was becoming less necessary. The Thornton men were healing, finding each other, and once they didn't need her anymore, she'd go back to being invisible. It was Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after Catherine had first sat on the floor beside Lucas, when everything changed. She was in the kitchen when she heard raised voices from the living room. James's voice, sharp and urgent. "Lucas, go to your room, now." Catherine moved to the doorway and froze. 3 men stood in the living room, and everything about them screamed danger. They wore suits, but the weapons poorly concealed under their jackets were obvious. James stood between them and the stairs, his posture defensive, his expression cold. "Mr. Thornton," one of the men said, his accent Eastern European, "we have message from your previous employer. They are not happy you retired. They wish to discuss your return." "I'm not returning. I have a son to raise." "Yes, the boy." The man's smile was cruel. "We know about the boy. 7 years old. Very smart. Would be shame if something happened to him." Catherine felt ice flood her veins. James's previous employer, the locked office, the military precision in his movements, the way he assessed threats. James Thornton wasn't just a widower working from home. He was a spy, or had been. "You threaten my son and you'll regret it," James said, his voice deadly calm. "No threats, just facts." The man pulled out a phone, showing James something on the screen. "You have 48 hours to agree to one final mission, or the boy has accident. We know where he goes to school. We know his schedule. We know everything." They left as quickly as they'd arrived. James stood frozen in the living room, his face drained of color. Catherine stepped out from the kitchen doorway. "You heard?" James said flatly. "Yes. I need you to take Lucas. Tonight. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find him." James moved to his locked office, pulling out a phone Catherine had never seen before. "I'll handle this. But Lucas can't be here. What are you going to do?" "What I always did. What I'm trained to do." James's expression was hard. "I'll go on their mission, and I'll make sure none of them survive to threaten my son again." "That's not... It's the only way." James looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. "Catherine, I know I have no right to ask this, but will you protect my son? Will you keep him safe until I can eliminate this threat?" Catherine thought about Lucas, about his ancient eyes and brilliant mind, about how he'd finally started talking again, started healing, about how losing his father would destroy him. "No," she said. James's expression hardened. "Then I'll find someone else." "No, I mean you're not going alone." Catherine pulled out her own phone. "You're not the only one with a complicated past, Mr. Thornton. I spent 3 years in the Army, military intelligence. I got out because I was tired of the violence, tired of living in shadows. But I'm not helpless, and I'm not letting you suicide yourself on some mission while Lucas waits at home wondering if his father is coming back. This isn't your fight. It is now. That little boy upstairs has been through enough. He's not losing another parent." Catherine met James's eyes. "We protect him together. We handle this threat together. And then we all come home. Together." Something shifted in James's expression. "You were military intelligence?" "Fort Meade. 3 years analyzing foreign communications and threat assessment. I left because I wanted a quiet life. Turns out quiet is overrated." James almost smiled. "Catherine Hayes, you are full of surprises. So are you, spy man." Catherine moved toward the stairs. "Now let's get Lucas somewhere safe, come up with an actual plan, and handle this like professionals instead of martyrs." They moved Lucas to Catherine's apartment that night. The boy was scared but trying to be brave, asking questions about vectors and probability that were his way of processing fear through mathematics. Catherine sat with him on her worn couch, letting him explain statistical analysis, while James made calls from the kitchen. "Is Dad going to die?" Lucas asked suddenly, his voice small. "Not if I can help it. You're going with him. To fight the bad men." "Yes. You could die too." Catherine took Lucas's hand. "Lucas, I'm going to tell you the truth, okay? Because you're smart enough to handle it." He nodded. "Your dad and I are both trained for this kind of thing. We know what we're doing. But yes, there's risk. There's always risk." Catherine squeezed his hand. "But we're not going in blind or stupid. We're going in with a plan, and we're going to come back. Promise?" I can't promise that. No one can promise that. Catherine pulled him close. But I promise I will fight like hell to make sure your dad comes home to you. And I promise that if something happens to him, you won't be alone. Ever. I'll be here. Lucas buried his face in her shoulder, his small body shaking with silent sobs. I just got him back. I just started talking again. I can't lose him too. You won't. We won't let that happen. James appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he watched Catherine comfort his son. When Lucas finally fell asleep, exhausted by fear, James helped carry him to Catherine's bed. He loves you, James said quietly, watching Lucas sleep. In 6 weeks, you've become the most important person in his life besides me. He needed someone who saw him as a person, not a problem. I failed him in that. James's voice was heavy with guilt. After Sarah died, I couldn't look at him without seeing her, couldn't hear him talk without hearing her voice in his words. So I shut down, locked myself in my office and pretended I was fine, left him alone to grieve without support. You were grieving too. That's not an excuse. He needed his father. I wasn't there. James turned to face her. But you were, a stranger who had no obligation to care, and you sat on the floor beside my son and showed him he mattered. You saved him, Catherine. The way you're about to help save both of us. We're partners in this, Catherine said firmly. Partners protect each other. James moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. When did the cleaning lady become the most remarkable person I've ever met? Probably about the same time the cold, distant spy became someone capable of changing for his son. They were inches apart, the tension between them electric. James's thumb brushed her cheek, and Catherine felt her breath catch. If we survive this, James started. When we survive this, Catherine corrected. When we survive this, James amended, his smile slight but real. I'd like to take you to dinner. A real date. Not employer and employee. Just us. I'd like that. James kissed her then, soft and careful, and full of promises neither of them might live to keep. When they pulled apart, Catherine rested her forehead against his. Now let's go make sure we both survive to keep that date. The mission was supposed to be straightforward. James would agree to the assignment, eliminating a target in a neutral location. Catherine would provide overwatch from a distance, her military intelligence training making her perfect for identifying threats James might miss. They'd complete the mission, eliminate the men who'd threatened Lucas, and come home. But nothing in their world was ever straightforward. The target location was a warehouse in Baltimore. James was supposed to go in alone, but Catherine had positioned herself on a roof across the street with a borrowed rifle. The men who'd come to James's house were there, along with at least 6 others. It was a setup, an ambush. Catherine's voice crackled through James's earpiece. It's a trap. At least 9 hostiles. They're not expecting you to complete the mission. They're planning to kill you. Good thing I have Overwatch then. James's voice was calm despite the danger. Can you get me a clear path? Working on it. What followed was a brutal 40 minutes of coordinated violence. Catherine provided cover fire, taking out threats James couldn't see. James moved through the warehouse like a shadow, eliminating hostiles with efficient precision. They worked together like they'd been partners for years, each anticipating the other's moves, trusting without question. When it was over, 9 men lay dead, and James and Catherine stood in the warehouse, both breathing hard, both covered in other people's blood. We make a good team, James said. The best. Catherine lowered her rifle. Now let's go home to your son. They drove back to D.C. in silence, processing what they'd done, what they'd survived. When they reached Catherine's apartment, the sun was rising. Lucas was awake, sitting on the couch where they'd left him, his face tear-stained. Dad! He launched himself at James, who caught him and held him like he'd never let go. I'm here, buddy. I'm okay. We're both okay. Lucas pulled back, looking between his father and Catherine. You came back. Both of you came back. Told you we would, Catherine said, sitting beside them on the couch. Lucas threw his arms around her too, and suddenly Catherine was part of the embrace, this little family that had formed in the most unlikely circumstances, a spy learning to be a father, a boy learning to trust the world again, a cleaning lady who'd sat on the floor beside a silent child and changed everything. 6 months later, Catherine had moved into the Georgetown brownstone, not as the cleaning lady, she'd hired a service for that, but as something new, something undefined. Partner, mother figure, the woman James loved and Lucas adored. It was a Thursday afternoon when Catherine found Lucas on his bedroom floor, surrounded by books as always. But this time, He was writing instead of reading. "What are you working on?" Catherine asked, sitting beside him. Lucas held up his notebook. A story. About a boy who stopped talking because the world was too loud. And about the person who taught him that silence was okay, but so was speaking up when you had something to say. Catherine felt tears burning. That sounds like a good story. It is, because it has a happy ending. Lucas leaned against her. The boy learns that being different is okay, that the right people will love you exactly as you are, and that sometimes the people who save you aren't the ones you expect. Very wise for a 7-year-old. Almost 8, Lucas corrected. And I learned from the best. James appeared in the doorway, watching them with an expression of such love it made Catherine's heart ache. He sat on the floor beside them, something he did regularly now, understanding that sometimes the most important conversations happened at ground level. "Family meeting," James announced. "I have a question for both of you." Lucas perked up. "What kind of question?" James pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. He looked at Catherine. "The kind where I ask if you'll marry me. Officially become part of this weird, unconventional family we've built." Catherine looked at the ring, then at James, then at Lucas, who was bouncing with excitement. "Say yes," Lucas urged. "Please say yes. I already picked out a tux for the wedding." "You picked out a tux?" Catherine laughed through tears. "I'm very prepared." Lucas grinned. "Also, I need someone to help explain my homework to Dad. You're much better at translating 8-year-old genius into regular person language." "Well, when you put it that way." Catherine held out her hand. "Yes, absolutely yes." James slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her into a kiss while Lucas cheered. When they broke apart, Lucas was between them, hugging them both. "Best family ever," Lucas declared. Catherine thought about her journey. Foster care, the army, years of making herself invisible, cleaning other people's houses while her own life felt empty, and then a silent boy who needed someone to sit on the floor beside him, a grieving father who needed to remember how to be human, a threat that forced her to remember she was more than just the cleaning lady. "Best family ever," Catherine agreed, holding them both close. She'd come to the Georgetown brownstone to clean, to stay invisible, to collect a paycheck and move on. Instead, she'd found a home, a son who wasn't hers by blood, but absolutely was hers by choice. A partner who saw past the uniform to the remarkable woman underneath, a love she never thought she'd find. Lucas had stopped talking because the world was too loud, too harsh, too uncomfortable with his brilliant, different mind. And Catherine had sat on the floor beside him, seeing him not as broken, but as perfect exactly as he was. In saving him, she'd saved herself, and together, they'd saved James. That was the thing about love, Catherine thought. It didn't always look like you expected. Sometimes it looked like sitting on the floor with a silent child. Sometimes it looked like fighting beside someone to protect what mattered. Sometimes it looked like 3 broken people creating something whole. Lucas went back to his story, writing about happy endings. James pulled Catherine closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside the Georgetown brownstone, a family that had found each other in the most unlikely way was exactly where they belonged. And Catherine, who'd spent years being invisible, was finally completely seen.